think that's the right one. Or should it be that one? And we're live, folks, to review an episode called Pitbull something. Over to Jeff to help me out with the title.
Pitbull Sessions.
Right.
Which is episode 15 of season 6 of Homicide: Life on the Street. It was written by Sean Whitesell, Julie Martin, and James Yoshimura, and directed by Barbara Koppel. March 13th, 1998 on NBC. And I'm going to go straight, as usual, to David B226 Morris and what he had to say about the episode on TV.com. And I've already read a little bit of this, so I know that I have to skip something because it's a bit of a spoiler. So I'm going to try to connect these sentences in this as best I can. Still hear me, Ben?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Over the course of season 6, it became clear that the writers of Homicide were grooming John Sada's character of Paul Falzone to be more of a central character in future seasons. And Falzone and Pimbleton are opposite poles as detectives and people. This was made particularly clear in Pitbull Sessions, which threw the two detectives on the same case. Falzone isn't as smart as Pimbleton, but he is intelligent enough to note that Frank is a more thinking, philosophical detective, while he is a man of action. Despite this vital difference in personality, the two have a more cordial relationship than Pimbleton did with shufflers like Lewis or Felton. Maybe Frank was starting to mellow, or maybe Paul respects Frank more than the others did. The case they are called in on isn't quite a murder. An 82-year-old man named Leonard Jarks is found dead in his house, having been mauled to death by 3 pit bulls. The dogs belong to the old man's grandson, Harry, who is nowhere to be found. The question is, was this death accidental, or was Harry responsible in some way? This seems like a remote possibility, but in the first half of the episode, we get the idea that Harry's pretty much a layabout who doesn't care much for people's feelings. This is made clear when the detectives finally track him down, and the first thing that he does is ask for his dogs back. We've seen some pretty creepy and cold characters over the years, but Harry Jarks is something else. It isn't because he doesn't think he's responsible for his grandfather's death. It's that he doesn't care about anything. Not the fact that his father wants him in jail, not that he hasn't succeeded at anything in his life, not even the fact that his grandfather is dead. He is completely vacant. Not indifferent, he's empty. And because Falzone is more emotional than Frank, he can't seem to process this. In one of the longer interrogation sequences that he's had this year, he does everything to try and force something from Harry. At first he wants a confession, but as he progresses and it becomes clear this isn't a murder, he wants to get any response. The only time he gets it is when he informs Harry that because his dogs killed his grandfather, they are being put to sleep. Harry is portrayed by a then-unknown Paul Giamatti, an actor who has become famous for portraying comic schmucks in films like American Splendor and Sideways. Here he plays another kind of loser, but there is nothing funny about it, and it is an early showing of the range he would be capable of. That's not to say that there isn't some funny material in this episode. Bayless is working a shift at the waterfront because Meldrick is still MIA, and Guardy and Munch come over after clearing a case that involves a truly clueless felon. In this one, the suspect helped kill a cab driver and then remained on the scene for the detectives to catch. This leads to reflections on some of the dumber criminals that Baltimore seems to house, including a suspect who confesses when Bayless tells him that they have a special camera that shows the last thing a killer saw before he died, and 2 men who killed each other over which service branch was better in the Vietnam War, a conflict both were too young to have fought in. Sound absurd? All of these examples were modifications of actual murders in David Simon's book. Considering some of the would-be devious felons that we've come across, it is comforting to know that there are felons whose brains are mostly tapioca. There is another twist on it when one of the waterfront's new employees is revealed to be a poet-artist who has been writing the names of the detectives and some of the victims in his book as art. Munch gets pissed because of this and fires him. It's possible this is a subtle way of showing how some of the detectives didn't like Simon's presence on the squad when he was writing his book. Or maybe I'm just seeing things. Oh, and we have one other piece of business. Georgia Ray Mahoney's civil suit, much to the surprise of everyone, has been given a court date by a district judge named Gerald Gibbons. Gibbons set Georgia Ray free on bail after Junior Bunk was caught shooting at them, and it turns out that he requested this case personally. Because of this, Kellerman is convinced that Gibbons is on the Mahoney payroll and visits his office only to get stonewalled by his secretary. However, okay, when all is said and done, what remains with you after pit bull sessions is how a person as vacant and empty as Harry Jarks can be. As unfathomable as the young men who deal and die in the drug wars and shrug off jail and death every day, it seems more reasonable that a man like Jarks, who has been given everything, every advantage in life, and has been completely absent of responsibility. As Frank points out when Falzone asks him about the case in the episode's coda, the victim's son will mourn the loss of his father for the rest of his life, and the grandson will mourn the loss of his dogs as long as it takes for him to find new dogs. Ultimately, Harry Jarks just doesn't care about anything, and that can be as unsettling as any cold-blooded killer. My score, 8.4. Ben, how about you?
Well, I'm going to give it 8 out of 10, and that is mainly because of Paul Giamatti, who I thought was very good as the guy, the sort of sociopathic guy. Just the way he played it, very, very hard to play that type of character. Because we've seen it before, not played that well, that sort of character. Right, what else? So, yes, when you were talking about him thinking that Frank's a thinker, I think that's mainly, as he pointed to, it's an intelligence thing between, but they mean intelligence in terms of like just sort of knowledge base, and the fact that because Frank's more experienced than Falzone and has, he had that classic education.
Yeah.
By
so
the Jesuits.
Falzone is really talking more about background than personality.
Yes, and as we and I was thinking about this before the hangout, that to remind the audience and people who are interested in about typology is that even though Frank is an extrovert, he is less sociable than somebody like Lewis, who is an introvert. But that's because of a non-type factor, and that is Lewis is from the community. Lewis talks in Ebonics. Most of the people he interacts with also talk in Ebonics. Frank doesn't talk in Ebonics. He's quite, academically inclined, I suppose, or more. He's more from a background. He had his classical education. He moves in different social circles, I suppose, Frank. So maybe it's harder for Frank to gain rapport with people, and he does seem to he does have this distance over people where he's become a little bit cynical, and so almost like an aspect of maybe a slight little bit of like the INTJ superiority complex in him. Sometimes just a little bit comes out, but a non-type factor there with Frank. So Lewis, even though he's an introvert, it's easier for him to socialize with people, easier for him to gain rapport because he has more in common with the people of Baltimore. And we've talked about that before.
At this point, I'd like to point out that an introvert can appear most sociable whether or not he feels connected to the community. So, that I'm not arguing with Ben's theory. I'm just saying that that's, not the only reason somebody can, and vice versa,
Oh yeah.
So it may not just be that Frank doesn't feel like he connects with the community. It just may be that, as he told Bayless
oh dear, I lost Jeff there, folks. Just he says, as he told Bayless in, and then I lost Jeff. Oh, maybe what I could do is if I stop switching the screen, that might help with the connection. Yeah, Jeff's got thunderstorms in Texas. Not a thunderstorm, a hurricane. It's even worse. So yeah, yeah, and of course there are lots of just non-type factors. So I can even give an example of somebody who. So, for instance, there's a channel by somebody called. Her channel name is Dizzy Dolly 7. She's a young lady with Asperger's, but she talks about how she is able to socialize or has the energy to be able to socialize, but only for about 30 minutes. And because she was taught from a young age how to do all of the socializing thing, how to hang out at the country club, things like that. So these non-type factors can very much influence, how someone interacts, and plus someone's just general self-confidence.
This will be one I'll look forward to listening to, so I can hear what you actually said.
Yeah, you said something about Bayless, and then it cut off, and then I had to fill in.
Something about Bayless.
It said something as Frank said to Bayless, and then it went, and I had to fill for about a minute or two.
He said that he has trouble like opening up to people, and the only other thing I said was that like when he does sort of express himself more openly, people tend to sort of be scared of him or shy away from him, and he sort of has this kind of bombastic thing that comes across where people think, oh, he's very ego driven, and so he has a hard time getting close to people.
Yeah. So, I mean, the ego is there. The ego is definitely there. That's definitely
so what makes him really good in the box, in the place where he feels like he most is in his zone, also can be kind of intimidating to other people. But it's obvious that Frank's wife has seen the other sides to him.
Yeah.
It just may be that not a whole lot of other people have.
Yeah. And it's also part of a universal theme, like when we go back to like the detectives in the show, the American detectives in the 1930s, where it's the experienced detective. They've seen like the dark side of humanity, and it affects them, makes them a little bit cynical. You can wear them down a little bit. And
this is the opportunity for me to say for people listening that we're feeling the residual effects of Hurricane Harvey here in Texas as I'm recording this. So that's one of those things is sporadic internet. So it may drop off again, and it may drop off for good. So in case that happens, I'll go ahead and give my brief thoughts on the episode, in case Ben has to finish the whole thing solo. I agree with what you said about Paul Giamatti and playing the character. I think that was a good performance, very convincing. If anything, though, it has the effect on me of something we discussed before, where there's some things that can make you just sort of have a bad feeling about, you've mentioned certain episodes that kind of made you feel depressed or they were just too dark.
Yeah.
And I got a little bit of a feeling from this episode where it was a convincing performance, but I just, I can't give the episode as a whole as high a score because it disturbed me in a way where I wasn't like, I couldn't appreciate it as much, I think, maybe. And it wasn't even just him specifically as a character. It wasn't like I was like, well, that guy just bothered me that much. It was just more of the general kind of sense of something I've said happens often on Homicide and Law and Order and some other shows as well, is I just have this kind of feeling of humanity sucks at the end of it because of a lot of different things that were pointed out in the episode. And so that's kind of how I felt in this. This episode is definitely one of those episodes where it feels like most of the characters are frustrated and unsatisfied with what's taking place.
Like this facial expression here. This is usually the sort of thing where you see the difference between the good actors and the bad actors, like when they can pull it off or not.
One of the things that I hate the most is people doing bad fake crying.
Yeah.
And so when I see that, it instantly turns me off of it. So I can't, I taken out of the scene when somebody is trying to cry and they're bad at it, so it just comes off as fake seeming. So obviously that was not the case here.
Yeah.
And I thought actually the most effective part of the whole, scenes with him and Falzone was the part where he had covered his eyes and then he pulled his hands back and said, I'm not crying. And it was obvious he was telling the truth because you saw his eyes and his eyes were dry. So,
and also, this thing is true because with sociopaths, it's like the sociopath is like the ultra exaggerated version of an ESTP, where it's just like taken like 100 times more, where there's like no feeling at all on the inside. But maybe they do. Sometimes they have that connection with, say, animals, and so they brought that and they brought that aspect in here, where they can have the empathy with an animal, but not with human beings.
Yeah. So anyway, I felt that I had sort of an overall not great feeling about the episode, but it doesn't mean I think it was a bad episode. It just meant that I wasn't like afterwards thinking, oh, that was like something I want to watch anytime soon again. It was just more of a I can appreciate the performance of everybody involved, and we had usual good acting performances from the regulars, and Andre Braugher was good in his parts and stuff, but as Mr. Morris said, they were sort of featuring Falzone more in this kind of exploring more of his personality a little bit.
Yeah, it's now the way so I've got here, like, this gives an idea of the way he walks. He does walk like somebody who, whoa, that guy's really trying too hard to like be big and tough.
Yeah, well, he's a shorter guy, and he's already said that he's trying to not come off to his colleagues like he doesn't know what he's doing. He's just a punk kid from Auto Squad, so he is trying to carry himself with some swagger, as they say, and try to convince people that he belongs there.
Wasn't there something with Judge Bush where somebody accused Judge Bush of walking with a swagger, and he says, no, that's just walking in Texas, something like that?
Maybe, I don't know.
But yeah, I mean, but I do take quite a big notice of body language and how people carry themselves.
Yeah.
As
so I'll make one comment about the scene in the bar. Well, I guess sort of two scenes, because there's one discussing dumb criminals, and that was probably my favorite part of the episode, was some of those scenes, and a couple things that are said in that sort of planted seeds for some further things that happened down the road. But in general, they were sort of comic relief, and that was well done. I didn't especially like the bit with the dude that was working for them that was drawing in the Bible and all that. I didn't really get why that made Munch so upset, and why everybody else sort of backed him up on getting rid of the guy. I didn't really didn't understand that, and it seemed to be kind of random in the episode. Like, they just sort of stuck that in there at the last minute, like they needed time to fill. So like, let's create this guy and have this, and so it seemed kind of random to me. I mean, Morris said he thought it had something to do with trying to reflect the cops' attitudes toward David Simon, but I don't know for sure. I don't know what that was about. So, but anyway, in case I do get cut off for good, I give the episode a 7 out of 10. So
maybe just saw it as like a betrayal of trust or something, but then he's an ENTP, so a bit weird.
Yeah, I don't know. Sometimes Munch reacts kind of randomly to certain things, and I don't really get what his deal is. Because it's one thing if he thought, when he saw the guy's Bible, at first he was thinking, this guy's some fundamentalist dude who's going to try to preach to me. And if he'd actually done that, then I could sort of see why he got upset. But he didn't. It wasn't anything about that. In fact, the guy basically said he didn't even believe in the Bible. He just used it because, he thought these things should go there for whatever reason. He was just sort of a weirdo. But yeah, I didn't really get that. I felt more for the guy than Munch in that situation. I don't know what his deal was. So,
I mean, I only needed a couple of lines added add in to make it believable, like, you know, wrote a, you don't, like, if he would have if he'd have drawn a specific drawing that got on Munch's nerves, and like
Yeah.
they could have like made the, that he drew me as a kitty or something, and like
Yeah,
that would annoy him.
so that part just seemed a little bit weird,
Yeah.
but
Yeah, a little bit. Did Charles Manson do weird drawings?
I think so, yeah.
Well, you see, I don't know if it was Charles Manson who did weird drawings or whether it was H.R. Giger who did weird drawings.
I know Manson did some kind of art.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was drawings or paintings or what, but I know he, you know, I know he was in music, obviously, but I'm pretty sure he did some sort of visual art stuff too. I'm definitely not an expert on him. I'm not one of those people that studied a bunch of Manson, so I don't know.
Right.
But I do remember that.
But yeah, and you were saying something earlier on about, yes, about extroversion, introversion, about the things that might influence sociability. Do you think you were just like just general confidence level, you know, like
yeah, what I've tried to get across to people, and I did a whole video about this, was that, you know, social awkwardness and introversion are two different things. They can be related to each other, but they're not like, you know, whatever that word is, equal sign equals, you know, they're not the same thing exactly.
equivalent.
So, yeah, right. Somebody can be an introvert and have spent their life, for various reasons, getting very confident at social situations and not come off as awkward at all socially, at least not very often. But the basic thing of introversion, that they're being drained by the experience, is occurring. It's just they don't really show it to anybody.
Yeah.
And they need that time to recharge from it. But in the social situation, they're very confident and come across friendly and personal and all that. And you can have extroverts that come off extremely awkward in social situations.
Yeah.
And in different ways, you know, not just shyness. Sometimes it can be, you know, I've seen sometimes these lists of, you know, things extroverts are frustrated with, or things, you know, something like that. And you have one of them is the oversharer, like you know, it's like somebody talks about something and they feel like they've got to express a bunch of stuff about that right then, and it comes off really awkward because they just sort of spew information or things about something, and feel like, you know, people start to feel like that person's dominating the conversation, or they don't shut up, or, you know, and so that can be just as awkward as somebody who doesn't say much when you have someone who says too much. So the extroversion itself does not dictate whether somebody will be confident or natural in social situations. It's more about what they need, what they crave, than it is about what actually takes place in those situations. Because all that, as you said, there's a lot of non-type factors that play into that.
Yeah, I mean,
and there are other type factors that play into it that I think are temperament, you know, factors. Like introverted guardians will, in general, not everybody, but in general, be more social.
Yeah.
Than introverted, you know, intuitive types, for instance, because part of the guardian temperament is that, you know, there are certain things you're expected to do, and if you're like in a social group of some sort, you know, if you attend a function with your spouse or with your family or things like that, there's certain things you're expected to do or behave like, and whether you're introvert or extrovert, you're expected to do certain things, and introverted guardians will do some things that they really don't enjoy that much because they feel like it's their duty to do it, and they'll come across as being just the same as anybody else there because they're putting on an act basically to be that way.
Also, they're likely to come across people at a social function who are pretty much like them because there's so many guardians.
Right.
And so they have things in common. So there's not really the SN divide for them the way there is for the introverted intuitives. Yeah.
So that with you know, intuitives, it can be sort of a double thing because, you know, again, in both directions, because introverted intuitives can come across as awkward because they feel like they're not connecting with the people around them, or they don't know what to say, or they're, you know, just feel awkward by the whole situation. But extroverted intuitives can have, you know, again, the same kind of thing where they start to sort of spew information or words and not really be going anywhere, and people are like, "Who's this weirdo?" You know. So,
an interesting story about David Kersey Sr. is that, well, what he wrote in his book is that basically he married the first woman that understood him.
yeah.
And he was like the first like woman that he could have like an abstract conversation with, and it was ENFJ.
Yeah.
And at university.
Yep. Sometimes that happens.
So that was just after World War II, folks. So I don't know what else to say about this because there's not really that much.
Well, that's fine because if we wrap it up now, then I won't have to worry about my internet going out again. And
Okay.
and just have this be a little bit of a shorter one than usual. That's fine.
So I think I'll give it. Okay, I'll give the last 10 minutes of it 8 out of 10, and the rest of it 7 out of 10. So maybe I'll give it like 7.5 out of 10.
And I said 7, so an average of about 7.5 in there for the two of us. Yeah. And join us next week for an interesting episode with a lot of different things going on, and it's called Mercy.
Ooh.